Lorenzen Wright played 13 seasons in the NBA. In Memphis, he was more than a former basketball player. He was family. Then, just after midnight, Lorenzen Wright's phone called 911. The dispatcher heard a man, a rapid series of shots, and then silence. No rescue came. For days, no one even knew the caller was Lorenzen Wright. 9 days later, Memphis found its hometown hero in a remote field. His jewelry and expensive watch were still with him. Yet the first story offered to investigators pointed suspicion in a completely different direction. Lorenzen had supposedly left carrying cash for a secret illegal deal. Dangerous strangers may have been waiting for him. Suddenly, the victim was being made to look like the reason for his own disappearance. But the valuables had not been taken. A $1 million life insurance policy existed. Before police found Lorenzen, someone had already built a large fire behind the home he had just left. And 7 years later, investigators pulled a weapon from a Mississippi lake. How did it get there? Why did nobody answer Lorenzen's final call for help? Who needed Memphis to believe that its hometown hero had caused his own ending? And why did every serious answer begin leading back toward the people he had trusted most? This is not only the story of who betrayed Lorenzen Wright, it is the story of how they almost buried his name with him. And to understand why that second betrayal mattered so much, you first have to understand what the name Lorenzen Wright meant in Memphis. Some NBA players belong to a franchise. Lorenzen belonged to a city. He was born in Memphis on November 4, 1975, but his childhood moved back and forth between Memphis and Oxford, Mississippi. His parents separated when he was young. His mother, Deborah, lived in Oxford. His father, Herb, remained deeply connected to basketball in Memphis. Before Lorenzen could understand what an NBA dream cost, his family had already paid a brutal price. Herb Wright had once been strong enough to chase professional basketball himself. He later worked for the Memphis Parks Department and coached young players. When Lorenzen was 7, Herb removed some disruptive teenagers from a gym. One returned and attacked him. Herb survived. He never walked again. That could have ended the basketball education inside the Wright family. Instead, Herb coached from a wheelchair. He taught Lorenzen balance without being able to demonstrate it on his own feet. He explained position, leverage, touch, and footwork by moving his chair around the court. Father and son trained around a lake. Lorenzen ran the laps. Herb pushed the wheels in the opposite direction. Imagine being a tired teenager and seeing your father still moving. What excuse could possibly survive that picture? Lorenzen later said that when his legs wanted to stop, he thought about what Herb would do if he could run again. So he kept going. That is the first thing the later headlines missed about Lorenzen Wright. He was not created by money. He was created by obligation. He felt responsible for the people around him long before an NBA contract gave him the power to help them. Basketball did not invent that instinct. Basketball only made it expensive. By his senior year at Booker T. Washington High School, Lorenzen was no local secret. He was nearly 7 feet tall, athletic, aggressive around the rim, and productive enough to average roughly 27 points and 18 rebounds. USA Today named him Tennessee's top high school player. He became a McDonald's All-American. Major programs could offer him brighter television lights. Lorenzen chose Memphis State. Of course he did. Leaving might have been the conventional path to national celebrity. Staying meant something more personal. It meant his mother, father, friends, old coaches, and every kid who knew the same streets could watch the dream happen in front of them. At Memphis, Lorenzen did not need 4 years to prove the point. In 2 college seasons, he established himself as a long, physical front court player with NBA size and a motor that looked built for professional contact. Then came the 1996 NBA draft. Allen Iverson went first. Marcus Camby went second. Sharif Abdur-Rahim, Stephon Marbury, Ray Allen, and Antoine Walker followed. Then the Los Angeles Clippers used the 7th pick on Lorenzen Wright. 7th in one of the deepest drafts basketball had ever seen, ahead of Kobe Bryant, ahead of Steve Nash, ahead of Jermaine O'Neal. That does not mean Lorenzen became greater than those players. It means the league once looked at his body, energy, production, and future and decided he belonged near the front of that class. The young man who had watched his father circle a lake in a wheelchair became a millionaire overnight. And almost immediately, the money began flowing outward. Lorenzen bought homes and cars. He helped friends and relatives with college. He bought shoes for high school TMs. He supported a youth league. He bought so many Grizzlies tickets for people around him that attending a game could feel like a family reunion with basketball happening in the middle. When a heartbreaking local story emerged about a child facing life alone, Lorenzen helped establish financial support for him. He also gave friends jobs. One drove, one cooked, another helped with security. Someone made sure Lorenzen woke up on time. From the outside, that arrangement could be mocked as an NBA entourage. Inside Lorenzen's world, it was a promise being honored. He had grown up telling friends that if one of them escaped, the others would not be forgotten. Later, Lorenzen explained the philosophy simply. I wanted them to share in some of my success. Was that generous? Absolutely. Was it dangerous? It could be both. The NBA writes the checks to one man. Success can make 20 people feel employed by his future. Every new house, tuition bill, car payment, ticket request, family emergency, and business idea begins orbiting the same bank account. The player thinks he is building security. Sometimes he is building a machine that can run only while the contract keeps feeding it. Lorenzen's professional career lasted 13 seasons and 778 games. He played for the Clippers, Atlanta Hawks, Memphis Grizzlies, Sacramento Kings, and Cleveland Cavaliers. He was not an all-star and never pretended to be one. He made his living doing the work glamour avoids: rebounding, defending, setting screens, absorbing contact, and using his size wherever a team needed it. His father called one of Lorenzen's habits the Memphis Howl. Grab the rebound, throw the elbows out, make a sound that tells everybody the ball belongs to you. That was Lorenzen's game, not polished celebrity. Possession. He fought for space as if someone might take it the moment he relaxed. In 2001, the Vancouver Grizzlies moved to Memphis. That same summer, Lorenzen was traded home. The timing felt scripted. Memphis finally had an NBA team, and one of its own was waiting inside the uniform. A longtime friend described Lorenzen as the face of Memphis. Another called him the king of the city. Those were not claims that he was the best player in basketball. They meant something deeper. Penny Hardaway had been the city's superstar. Lorenzen was the man people could reach. They saw him in restaurants, gyms, churches, neighborhoods, charity events, and the seats he had paid for. He did not float above Memphis. He moved through it. He helped the Grizzlies reach 3 straight postseasons from 2004 through 2006, the first playoff era in franchise history. The numbers were not Hall of Fame numbers. The connection was bigger than the numbers. Memphis watched one of its sons play high school basketball there, play college basketball there, become a lottery pick, and return in an NBA uniform. How many cities ever get that complete circle? That is why the final field could not become just another crime scene. Memphis knew the man before strangers learned the mystery. It knew his father in the wheelchair. It knew his mother, Deborah, who later described Lorenzen with the sentence, "Every famous adult son secretly hopes still belongs to him." He was a mama's boy. Simple as that. It knew the children he had brought to games. It knew the friends whose bills he had paid and the young players whose shoes he had bought. So when the story after his disappearance began drifting toward secret money, dangerous strangers, and illegal business, Memphis was not hearing gossip about a distant athlete. It was hearing somebody rewrite a neighbor. And that rewriting began before Lorenzen's family even knew he was gone. But first came the marriage, because the relationship that would later sit at the center of a courtroom began like a hometown love story. Lorenzen met Shara Robinson when he was still a teenager playing summer basketball. Her father coached him. Shara was older, glamorous, confident, and familiar with the world around the game. Friends later remembered how completely the young Lorenzen fell for her. They had a son, Lorenzen Jr., and eventually married. More children followed, a daughter named Loren, twin boys, Lamar and Shamar, another daughter, Sophia, a son, Lawson. Then came Sierra. She lived only 11 months. Her death in 2003 struck the family at a depth no contract could reach. Shara later said she did not believe Lorenzen ever truly recovered. Whether anyone can measure another person's grief is doubtful. What is certain is that the Wright family carried a loss no parent expects to survive, and basketball kept moving. Games do not wait for morning to become manageable. The schedule returns. The crowd arrives. A player tapes his ankles, answers questions, sets screens, and goes home to a house where one room has become unbearable. Money can soften inconvenience. It cannot negotiate with grief. For years, Lorenzen and Shara appeared to live the NBA version of abundance: large homes, cars, travel, private coaching, a nanny, and friends moving through the family economy. But abundance can become a monthly obligation. The couple separated. They reconciled. They renewed their vows. Then they separated again. There were accusations of infidelity on both sides. Shara later made allegations about violence during the marriage. Friends described mistrust running in both directions. Those claims became newspaper material after Lorenzen's death, because tragedy makes every old argument look like prophecy. An ugly marriage can explain resentment. Only evidence can explain a crime. In February 2010, after 13 years of marriage, the divorce became final. The numbers inside the agreement were staggering. Lorenzen was ordered to pay roughly $26,000 every month in support and maintenance. That figure had been built around the income of an NBA player, even though the NBA career had already ended. He was also required to maintain a $1 million life insurance policy for the 6 children. Shara, as their mother and custodian, would control the proceeds as trustee. The policy was supposed to protect 6 children if their father could no longer provide. But because Shara would control the proceeds, the safety net also created a question that would grow much larger after Lorenzen died. By 2010, the $55 million Lorenzen had reportedly earned in NBA salary did not mean he had $55 million. 2 expensive homes faced foreclosure. The former couple reportedly carried millions in joint debt. Checks had bounced, the contract payments had stopped, but the lifestyle had not learned how to stop with them. Lorenzen was 34, out of the league, and considering whether basketball overseas might offer one more paycheck. The public saw a former NBA millionaire. The bank saw expiring assets. The divorce court saw obligations. Friends saw a man trying to remain the provider after the machine that made him one had shut down. The easy headline practically wrote itself. Former athlete loses money. Former athlete knows questionable people. Former athlete disappears. Therefore, the athlete must have brought danger home. It was a convenient story because it made Lorenzen responsible for explaining his own death. And it was about to become even more convenient for somebody else. After the divorce, Lorenzen lived near Atlanta with his lifelong friend, Michael Gibson. The arrangement did not look glamorous. It looked transitional. One chapter had closed, but no replacement had fully opened. Lorenzen talked about trying to play overseas. He still trained and moved between Atlanta and Memphis. Most importantly, his children remained in Memphis with Shara, guaranteeing continued contact. Divorce can end a marriage on paper without ending the emotional system around it. 6 children still need schedules, money, rides, calls, decisions, birthdays, games, and parents who can stand in the same room. Old attraction can survive beside old anger. Resentment can share a phone with intimacy. The divorce was final. The attraction was not. Recovered messages showed Lorenzen and Shara communicating in a sexual way shortly before his final trip. Shara did not have to force Lorenzen back through that door. She knew exactly which door to open. That is not romance, it is access. Lorenzen had reasons to believe he could enter Shara's home. He had reasons to believe a private invitation was exactly what it appeared to be. The marriage was over, but familiarity remained, and familiarity is the easiest door through which danger can walk without announcing itself. Lorenzen told his mother that he planned to return to Memphis around July 17th or 18th for his sister's baby shower. He also wanted to see his children, and friends expected to spend time with him. He flew into Memphis on July 18th. That evening, sometime around 9, Lorenzen went to a fitness center, picked up his 15-year-old son, and drove the boy to Shara's house. After that, the documented trail becomes narrow. Police later concluded that perhaps nobody except Shara spoke with Lorenzen between the drop-off and the emergency call. Think about how small that window is. A 13-year NBA veteran flies home, picks up his son, and enters a familiar house. A few hours later, his phone is calling for help from a dark field. At 11:47 that night, roughly 25 minutes before the call, Shara sent a message to Billy Ray Turner, a landscaper who visited her home regularly and whom she described as doing yard work. The message began, "Emma need my commission." It said Lorenzen wanted Turner to bring business cards in the morning. Then it ended. "You owe me, boy." Maybe it was an innocent landscaping referral. The defense later suggested exactly that. Turner operated a business, and Shara could have been arranging an introduction. But an innocent message becomes radioactive when it is sent 25 minutes before a man calls 911. What commission was Shara expecting, and why did Turner owe it that night? At 12:12 a.m., Lorenzen's phone connected to 911. The call went to a dispatcher in Germantown, Tennessee. A man's voice could be heard. Then came a rapid series of shots. The dispatcher tried to get an answer. None came. The operator recognized the sound as gunfire. And still, no law enforcement agency was contacted in the immediate aftermath. No patrol car began searching. No immediate rescue was sent toward the location. No one called Deborah and told her that a phone connected to her son had just transmitted an attack. Lorenzen Wright had spent his adult life being impossible to miss. He was 6'11". He had played on national television. He had worn Memphis across his chest. But when his phone asked for help, he became an unidentified signal passing through the night. How does that happen? Jurisdiction was part of the problem. The call reached one dispatch center while its location sat outside the obvious boundaries. The caller could not answer, and technology in 2010 did not hand the operator a perfect moving dot and a name. Those facts explain difficulty. They do not erase failure. The system did not build the trap around Lorenzen Wright, but it surrendered the first hours after it closed. People had time to move, evidence had time to disappear, and rumor had time to arrive before fact. And Lorenzen's family had no idea that the most important call in the case had already been recorded. The next day came, then another. Lorenzen did not appear at the baby shower. He did not answer his mother. His oldest daughter tried calling him 5 times after the family event. No response. Deborah knew her son. Famous or not, busy or not, he returned her calls. When she spoke to Shara, Deborah heard something that did not calm her. Shara did not report that Lorenzen was missing. According to Deborah's later testimony, Shara said the police had better do their job. Do their job? About what? At that moment, Deborah was still trying to establish whether there was a job for police to do. That sentence frightened her enough to act. On July 22nd, 3 days after the 911 call, Deborah Marion filed a missing person report for her son. The city now had 2 disconnected facts: an unidentified emergency call containing an attack, and a missing former NBA player whose mother knew something was terribly wrong. The connection should have been immediate. It was not. 5 days after the missing report, investigators finally discovered the 911 call and began narrowing the location. The signal pointed toward a wooded area near Callis Cutoff Road in southeast Memphis. This was not some distant criminal territory hundreds of miles away. It was a local road Lorenzen knew, a shortcut not far from his mother's home. On July 28th, 9 days after the phone call, officers searched the area. They found Lorenzen Wright. The July heat had already damaged evidence, and stolen time investigators could never recover. We do not need the physical details to understand what those 9 days cost. The important clues were enough. Lorenzen was still wearing a necklace and other jewelry. An expensive watch remained on his wrist. Evidence around the field indicated a sustained attack involving more than one weapon. Sections of a barbed wire fence had been cut away. This did not look like an impulsive robbery. It looked organized. It looked personal. It looked like somebody cared about removing traces, but did not care about taking the valuables sitting in plain sight. The jewelry became an accusation against the first easy theory. If Lorenzen had been lured by strangers for quick money, why leave the watch? If the purpose was robbery, why leave the chain? If dangerous outsiders had selected him by chance, why lead him onto a road known mainly to locals? And if the people closest to Lorenzen knew he was missing, why had his mother been the one forced to report it? Memphis did not receive answers that week. It received a spectacle. Hundreds of people gathered near the police line. Friends, former players, reporters, and residents moved toward the scene as the news spread. Deborah arrived and tried to get closer. Officers held her back from the place where her son had waited unseen for 9 days. Imagine that moment from a mother's position. Deborah had spent days calling a phone nobody answered and warning police that the silence was not normal. Now she learned there had been a call for help all along. The missed call was no longer a technical mistake. It had become part of the family's grief and part of Memphis history. Because the last time Lorenzen Wright tried to speak to his city, the city did not know it was him. Within days, thousands entered FedEx Forum to say goodbye. Penny Hardaway, Zach Randolph, Bonzi Wells, Damon Stoudemeyer, old teammates, coaches, childhood friends, and ordinary Memphians filled the building. The Grizzlies had once brought professional basketball home. Now the arena had become a public funeral for one of the men who made that homecoming feel real. The question moved through the crowd before newspapers could print it. Who killed Ren? But another question was already being planted beside it. What had Ren been involved in? That second question would become the most useful distraction in the entire case. Shara told police that Lorenzen had left her home with an unknown person in an unknown vehicle. She described cash, a box, and a conversation about turning a transaction into $110,000. Media reports soon connected the box and the money to an illegal deal. Shara later disputed that she had described the contents the way reporters claimed, but the damage did not require certainty. It required suggestion. Former NBA player, financial trouble, unknown driver, cash, secret transaction, dangerous people. The pieces were arranged so the public would finish the accusation itself. Lorenzen had also sold vehicles that later appeared in a federal investigation involving people linked to serious criminal business. Records did not establish that he knew the full nature of what those buyers were doing. But uncertainty is gasoline when a famous man dies under mysterious circumstances. Soon the theory became larger than the evidence. Maybe Lorenzen owed somebody. Maybe he trusted the wrong men. Maybe his financial desperation pushed him toward one final score. Maybe the NBA star had fallen into a world nobody around him understood. Every maybe turned the dead man into his own suspect. The theory dirtied the victim until the crime looked like a consequence of his lifestyle. If mysterious outsiders did it, nobody inside Lorenzen's family circle had to explain anything, and the $1 million policy became background noise. But the field kept rejecting the story. The jewelry remained. The watch remained. The road was local. And before officers found Lorenzen, they had already been told about a large fire behind Shara's house. This was July in Tennessee, one of the hottest periods of the year. Yet neighbors noticed a fire burning in the backyard shortly after Lorenzen disappeared. When police searched the property, they found evidence that documents had been burned. One surviving fragment contained part of the word attorneys. Was the fire connected to Lorenzen? At the time, investigators could not turn suspicion into a complete case. Which explanation now looked more natural? A distant secret deal, or a local trap followed by people close enough to know what papers might matter? Police could ask the question. They still needed proof. 14 months after Lorenzen's death, the $1 million policy paid out. It had been required by the divorce agreement to protect the 6 children, with Shara controlling the proceeds as trustee. In less than a year, most of the money was gone. Court proceedings exposed spending on expensive furniture, properties, vehicles, and travel. Lorenzen's father challenged Shara's control, and a judge eventually placed what remained under outside supervision. Was the policy the motive? The $1 million did not prove a conspiracy. But the former couple faced foreclosures and enormous debt. Lorenzen's NBA income had stopped, and Shara controlled a policy worth more than he could easily produce while alive. Pretending it meant nothing would have been just as dishonest. It was a potential financial motive, and the rapid spending made the question louder. The policy had been written for 6 children. In public imagination, it began to look like a price tag attached to their father's life. While the legal fight unfolded, Shara began rebuilding the public story of the marriage. 5 years after Lorenzen could no longer answer her, she published Mr. Tell Me Anything. The book was labeled urban fiction, but its central man was a towering professional basketball player from Mississippi who moved through familiar NBA cities. His marriage was filled with money, infidelity, confrontation, and revenge. Shara publicly said almost all of it came from real experiences with Lorenzen. That did not make the novel a hidden confession. It made it a public prosecution of a man who could no longer take the witness stand. The pattern was clear. First, Lorenzen's disappearance was linked to his alleged secret deal. Then the marriage was framed around his betrayals. Each news story asked what the dead man had done, not who had planned his death. The official investigation struggled. The delayed discovery had damaged physical evidence. The field had been exposed for more than a week. The initial theories pulled detectives toward dangerous outsiders, financial contacts, family conflict, and anyone who might have seen Lorenzen during his final hours. There was no clean eyewitness waiting to identify a shooter, no useful surveillance camera covering the field, and no weapon left beside Lorenzen. The people who knew more were either silent, frightened, or lying. Years passed. The mayor had promised justice at the memorial, but the promise aged. Police leaders met with Deborah Marion and tried to explain what they did not know. She kept Lorenzen's photographs near her. She spoke to them. She attended events. She answered reporters. She forced the city to remember that a cold case is never cold inside the victim's family. For investigators, the file froze. For Deborah, every day remained active. Memphis developed its own theories. Barbershops, radio shows, restaurants, basketball gyms, and living rooms became unofficial detective bureaus. Everybody knew somebody who had heard something. Everybody had a suspect. Everybody believed the answer was close enough to touch and somehow still beyond reach. That kind of public attention can help a case. It can also bury it under noise. What finally moved the investigation was not a perfect citizen arriving with a perfect conscience. It was a convicted man with his own reasons to talk. Jimmy Martin was Shara's cousin. By 2012, he was behind bars for an unrelated killing. He told investigators he had information about Lorenzen Wright. Martin was not the witness a prosecutor would design in a laboratory. He had committed serious crimes, changed parts of his story over time, and eventually testified under an immunity agreement. The defense would later attack his credibility for good reason. But a flawed witness can still know where something is buried. Martin drew a map pointing to a lake near Walnut, Mississippi. He told police that one of the weapons from Lorenzen's killing had been thrown into the water. Volunteers searched the lake, but rain made the water difficult to see through. They found nothing. The case returned to silence. Was Martin inventing a story to help himself? Was the map wrong? Had somebody moved the weapon? Or had the lake simply refused to surrender it? 4 more years passed. Then Memphis police built a renewed investigation called Operation Rebound. The name was almost too perfect. Lorenzen Wright had spent his career fighting for rebounds. Now detectives were trying to recover a case that had slipped through everybody's hands. In 2017, the FBI returned to the Mississippi Lake. This time, divers searched the specific area Martin had identified. They found a handgun buried beneath years of dark water and mud. The lake had kept it for 7 years. It had not erased it. Specialists restored enough of the weapon to compare its internal markings with evidence recovered from the field. The examination connected bullets and casings from Lorenzen's death to the gun from the lake. For the first time, Martin's map had become physical evidence. This was not a rumor from a barbershop, not a theory built around an NBA player's financial trouble, not a stranger in an unknown vehicle. A weapon from the crime had been exactly where Shara's cousin said it would be. Investigators did something smart. They did not immediately tell the world. They kept the recovery secret while pursuing wiretaps and watching the people connected to the case. Then, when they were ready, police announced publicly that the gun had been found. The announcement did more than inform Memphis. It applied pressure. Shara, who no longer lived in the area, suddenly traveled back to Memphis. She avoided communicating directly through her own phone and used another person to send messages to Billy Ray Turner. Surveillance officers watched Shara and Turner meet and walk together for more than half an hour. Investigators could not hear the conversation. They did not need to hear it to understand the timing. The lake had spoken. Two people connected to Lorenzen's final night suddenly needed to speak privately. Shara's phone searches became even harder to explain. After the arrest news began breaking, investigators found repeated searches about whether fingerprints survive underwater, how long they remain on metal, and whether a weapon could still carry prints after 7 years. Those questions sound innocent only if you remove the calendar. The public had just learned that police found a weapon in a lake. Shara wanted to know what 7 years of water could destroy. Why would that be her first concern? Why not search for news about the case? Why not ask whether the weapon could identify Lorenzen's killer? Why focus on what the water might have washed away? The search history did not stand alone. Phone records showed communication among Shara, Turner, and Martin before and after Lorenzen's death. Messages had been deleted. Investigators recovered many of them anyway. Turner's phone had also connected to a cell tower coverage area matching the field at 12:14 a.m. 2 minutes after Lorenzen called 911, Turner ordinarily used that tower far less often than the tower near his own home. Maybe a cell tower cannot place a man on one exact square of dirt. It can destroy the comfort of a distant alibi. When detectives interviewed Turner in December 2017, he minimized his relationship with Shara. To police, Billy Ray Turner was the yard man. In the same interview, he admitted that he and Shara had been intimate once. So was he only cutting grass, or had he already crossed much deeper into Lorenzen Wright's marriage? Turner denied participating in Lorenzen's death. Then detectives showed him a photograph of the weapon recovered from the lake. One investigator said the reaction was, "Like seeing a ghost?" Turner became visibly nervous. The detective said he could see Turner's heartbeat through his shirt. Turner still denied the crime. But the lake had changed the balance of the interview. For 7 years, investigators had asked people for a story. Now they possessed an object the story had to survive. The weapon led back to Martin. Martin led back to Shara. Shara's communications led back to Turner. And the investigation that began with unknown dangerous strangers was tightening around a former wife, her landscaper, and a cousin who said the plan had started months before Lorenzen entered that field. The most shocking revelation was not that somebody close to Lorenzen wanted him gone. It was that July 19th may not have been the first attempt. At Billy Ray Turner's 2022 trial, the jury heard 2 different kinds of testimony. One came from people who had overheard pieces of the alleged plan. The other came from Shara's cousin, Jimmy Martin, who said he had been pulled into it. Shara's cousin, Claudia Robinson, testified that Turner visited the house regularly during the summer before Lorenzen died. Claudia also acknowledged the possibility that the relationship was more personal. One day, Claudia said, Shara became angry and claimed Lorenzen had arranged for somebody to harm her. Claudia did not believe it. Shara insisted. Then, with the yard man standing inside her kitchen, Shara reduced the future to 4 words. It's him or me. She also said Lorenzen has to be gone. Turner did not announce a plan in that conversation, and Claudia never testified that she heard him agree to commit a crime. But she heard the idea placed in the room. On another occasion, Claudia heard Shara repeat the claim while Martin was also present. When Martin suggested Claudia might become a problem, Claudia testified that Shara responded with a threat against her too. Claudia became frightened and distanced herself from the house. She did not immediately go to police after Lorenzen died, and that delay gave the defense another question to ask. If the conversations were so serious, why wait? Fear is not a perfect answer. It is a human one. The courtroom then heard from Martin, and we have to be honest about him. He admitted involvement in the earlier conspiracy, was serving time for another killing, received immunity, and changed parts of his story between interviews. The defense argued that a man facing his own consequences had built a story useful to prosecutors. Then Martin described details that existed outside his mouth: the lake, the recovered weapon, the coded messages, the car, the metal detector, the cut fence, and the phone records. A liar can still tell the truth when the physical world keeps agreeing with him. According to Martin, Shara first raised the subject during meetings at her home. The conversations were not vague complaints about a difficult ex-husband. They became discussions about where Lorenzen could be caught without witnesses. Martin said he warned her that this was not business she wanted to enter. Then the discussion continued anyway. Another meeting focused on Atlanta, where Lorenzen was living with his roommate, Michael Gibson. Shara later told Martin she had visited the condominium and left a window unlocked. That detail changes the emotional temperature of the entire story. An unlocked window is ordinary until somebody leaves it open for men arriving after dark. Martin testified that he and Turner drove to the Atlanta area. They entered through the window looking for Lorenzen. Inside, a bald man was asleep on the couch. It was not Lorenzen, it was Lorenzen's roommate, Michael Gibson. The men recognized that the sleeping man was too short to be their target. They left without touching him. Gibson later confirmed that he was the bald roommate who slept on that couch. He also remembered Shara visiting the condominium and commenting that she had checked out the place. Think about what that means. Before Lorenzen returned to Memphis, according to the evidence accepted by the jury, men had already entered his Atlanta home through a window Shara had left unlocked. They had not come for property. They had not come to frighten him. They had come because they expected him to be there. Only a sleeping roommate in Lorenzen's absence stopped the plan. If Gibson had been taller, would he have survived the mistake? If Lorenzen had been home, would Memphis ever have heard the 911 call? The failure in Atlanta did not end the conspiracy. It sent the conversation underground. Facebook messages between Shara and Martin began discussing a party. They talked about equipment, timing, noise, neighbors, adults, and keeping children away. Martin later testified that the innocent words were code. The party was not a celebration. The equipment was not for music. And keeping the kids away meant avoiding witnesses. There is something especially cold about that language. A family uses the word party to describe birthdays, reunions, graduations, and children running through a house. Here, according to the prosecution, the same word was used to plan the removal of the children's father. By July 18th, Lorenzen was back in Memphis. Shara had access to him. Turner lived only a few miles from the field. Martin received instructions to come toward Memphis, but said he could not reach Turner before the attack. Then came the commission text, then the 911 call, then silence. Martin was not present at the field, according to his trial testimony. His account of the final moments came from what he said Shara told him afterward. That attribution matters. The jury was not watching a recording of the field. It was evaluating Martin's account beside the physical and digital evidence. According to that account, Shara led Lorenzen toward Callis Cutoff Road under the promise of meeting somebody about money. When Turner appeared, Lorenzen realized he had walked into a trap. He ran. The former NBA center cleared a barbed wire fence and tried to escape across the dark field. The emergency call captured the attack unfolding behind him. We do not need to replay those sounds. We do not need to count them. The fact that Lorenzen reached for 911 tells us everything important about his final intention. He wanted help. He wanted a witness. He wanted to survive. And on that night, the line answered without sending anyone to him. What happened after the field created another layer of evidence. Martin testified that Shara and Turner came to Mississippi appearing shaken. Later, Shara asked to borrow a metal detector. She said something important had been lost near the scene. Martin then traveled with Shara and Turner back toward the field. They searched for the missing object. A section of barbed wire was removed. Items connected to the cleanup were discarded elsewhere. Eventually, Martin said, Turner drove with him while they searched for a place to get rid of one of the weapons. Turner threw it into a lake. That was the weapon Martin marked on a map. The weapon volunteers missed in the rain, and the weapon FBI divers recovered 7 years later. The case did not break because somebody became eloquent in a courtroom. It broke because a lake preserved an argument. Martin could change parts of his story. The gun could not change locations. Beside the phone tower, deleted messages, Atlanta window, underwater searches, and commission text, the facts stopped behaving like coincidence. How many coincidences does a reasonable person owe one story? In December 2017, police arrested Billy Ray Turner. Days later, Shara Wright was arrested in California and returned to Tennessee. Memphis had waited 7 years to see names attached to the case. Now the former wife who had described a secret deal and the landscaper whose phone records shadowed the final minutes were both facing the most serious charges available. But the two defendants would not reach the same courtroom in the same way. In July 2019, Shara accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to facilitation of first-degree murder and facilitation of attempted first-degree murder. That wording matters. She did not plead guilty to personally committing first-degree murder. She admitted facilitating the crime and the earlier attempt. The sentence was 30 years. She did not testify against Turner. For Lorenzen's family, the agreement created a bitter kind of certainty. The law had recognized Shara's role, but the plea stopped a public trial from forcing every unanswered question into the open. Was the $1 million the central motive? How much of the plan did Shara create? What exactly happened between the house and the field? The plea closed charges without opening every locked room. In 2022, Shara became eligible for an early parole hearing because of sentence calculations and credits. Lorenzen's mother opposed release. Deborah's position was direct. Shara had received 30 years. Lorenzen's family had received life. The parole board denied early release. Another hearing was not scheduled before May 2027. Turner chose trial. In March 2022, a Shelby County jury heard the 911 call, the phone analysis, Claudia's conversations, Martin's testimony, the lake evidence, the Atlanta attempt, the coded messages, the deleted texts, and the defense attacks on every weakness in the prosecution's case. The defense was right about one thing. Jimmy Martin was inconsistent. He had reasons to help himself. He had participated in criminal discussions and waited until he was incarcerated to speak. But a jury does not have to believe every word from a witness to believe the parts corroborated by independent evidence. The jurors found Turner guilty of first-degree murder. They found him guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. And because of the Atlanta window, the sleeping roommate, and the plan that failed before the final plan succeeded, they found him guilty of attempted first-degree murder. Turner received a life sentence plus additional consecutive time. Combined with a separate weapons sentence, his effective punishment became life plus 41 years. He appealed. In 2023, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the claims and affirmed the convictions. The court found the evidence sufficient. For the legal system, that was the end of the central question. For Lorenzen's family, it could never be that clean. A conviction can identify responsibility. It cannot send a patrol car backward through time, return the 9 lost days, restore the insurance money, or erase the rumors. The frightening truth was that the plot grew inside ordinary access. A familiar house, a private message, a co-parenting visit, and people who knew when the children were present. Lorenzen built his life around bringing people inside. That trust gave access to people who had stopped deserving it. Lorenzen's story is often sold as the murder of an NBA millionaire. That description is accurate and still misses the point. The $55 million were mostly gone. The $1 million policy became evidence. The NBA career had ended. What remained valuable was the name. Lorenzen Wright meant father to 6 children, son to Deborah and Herb, teammate to men who had fought beside him, provider to people he had carried, and hometown hero to a city that had watched the entire basketball journey. That is why the story about the secret illegal deal was not harmless speculation. It tried to turn his weaknesses into an explanation for what other people had done. Yes, Lorenzen had financial trouble. Yes, his marriage was broken. Yes, he had spent too much and trusted people he should have examined more carefully. Yes, rumors existed around his private life and his associations. None of that placed a weapon in a Mississippi lake. None of it sent the commission message. None of it deleted the communications. None of it opened the Atlanta window. None of it explains the metal detector. Money can explain pressure. It cannot explain away evidence. And a complicated victim is still a victim. For 7 years, the easiest version of this story invited Memphis to ask what Lorenzen had done wrong. The courtroom finally asked what had been done to Lorenzen. That reversal restored something a conviction rarely receives credit for restoring: his position in his own story. Lorenzen was not a reckless former star who vanished into a mysterious deal. He was a father who came home to see his children. He was not an anonymous man whose choices brought strangers to a field. He was a trusted person led toward a local road by people who understood that trust. He was not silent in the final moment. He called 911. The line connected. The dispatcher heard the danger. No one came. That failure belongs in the title because it changes the whole story. Immediate help might have changed the search, the evidence, perhaps even the questions that haunted the family. We cannot know. The family deserved the chance for those answers to be different. Lorenzen spent his career chasing rebounds, collecting possessions everybody else thought were loss. After his death, Deborah did the same with his name. She kept calling. She kept demanding that a frozen file become active. The investigators who revived Operation Rebound returned to the old witness, the old map, and the lake returned the case. Not all at once. First a weapon, then a reaction, then searches, meetings, arrests, a plea, a verdict, and an appeal that failed. The legal ending took 12 years from the night of the call to Turner's conviction. That is longer than most NBA careers. Lorenzen played 13 seasons. His family spent almost that long waiting for a courtroom to say what Memphis had suspected for years. The danger had not arrived from some distant underworld Lorenzen chose to enter. It had moved through relationships close enough to know his children, his schedule, his home, his financial pressure, and the roads he trusted. The first injustice took Lorenzen Wright's life. The second tried to make his life look like the cause. Memphis could not undo the first, but it refused to accept the second. That may be why Lorenzen remains bigger in the city than his statistics. His averages do not explain the memorial at FedEx Forum. His playoff record does not explain a mother fighting for 12 years. His salary does not explain why people who never met him still called him Ren. The explanation is belonging. Lorenzen Wright belonged to Memphis. And when the story around his death tried to take that belonging away, the city kept asking the same question until a lake, a witness, a jury, and an appellate court finally answered. Who killed Ren? The law now has names. History should remember the name that mattered first. Lorenzen Wright, the 7th pick in one of basketball's greatest drafts. the son who ran while his father pushed a wheelchair around the lake, the rebounder who brought the Memphis Howl into the NBA, the hometown player who bought tickets, shoes, jobs, and chances for people around him, the father who returned to see his children, the man who called for help. They left Lorenzen Wright in a field. Memphis refused to leave his name there.